in a minute. Let's start with this. Iowa State fired their offensive coordinator, Tom Manning. He's been there 6 of the last 7 years. 1 year he spent in the NFL. And strength and conditioning director, Dave Andrew. Both of them are gone. The offensive coordinator's position at Iowa State, obviously you hate it for anyone. There's always people involved here. But that was something after this year. You just knew that could happen, and it did.
Iowa State, and of course Iowa, across the state has the same issue, but they need to find an offense that can be prolific but travel and match their defense because, until the last game of the season, they had shots to win every game if they could have scored, in many cases, just 17 points a game. If they average that, then they might be sitting in Arlington right now. Their defense was that good, but they were just so bad on offense this year and so wholly inconsistent that what should have been at least a bowl season was completely derailed by that. So, and the offensive coordinator and Matt Campbell have been together since Mountain Union. They go way back. Very similar situation to Dave Aranda and Ron Roberts, where the relationship was a long time relationship. I think that Matt Campbell will be wise to look outside the Mountain Union box a little bit and, maybe shake things up. You got to have something because there is going to be cold weather in, late October, November in Iowa. So you're going to have to fight that a little bit. But I do think that if you got a little more creative with it, that would be good for the Iowa State faithful.
Craig, this is by no means a surprise because you saw this coming.
Oh, yeah. By the way, their counterpart, their rival, with big news last night that I think we'll get to as well.
We'll get to that.
For their offensive woes, a big step up. So both Iowa schools making changes offensively and both desperately needed to. Two of the worst offensive programs in the entire country. Just weird how they're both in the same state. But this was something that had to happen, as you mentioned. That offense kept them from being so much more of what they could have been, given the defense that they had week in and week out. And then, last week against TCU, that was a product of just, I think, TCU wanting to drive the stake in, knowing what was at stake for them, being at home. Let's just take care of business and not have to stress out, for this final game. And they turned it into a celebration. I think Iowa State turned it into the funeral they've been waiting on. That was a proper ending to what has been a very grueling week-to-week season where you had the defense pretty much every week to win games, and your offense just could never seemingly help you out. And then even last week, the defense couldn't even really make any stops. So they're going to lose some talent. I mean, they're losing guys like Will McDonald and others. Already had one big-time player enter the draft this week, and there will be more to have to replace. And so you look around and you're like, okay, well, at least last year off that team where they didn't have any expectations, according to Matt Campbell, which is Bupkis, but regardless, they tried to kind of spin that like, no, that was y'all's expectations, not ours. So they lose all that talent. They actually bring a good bit of talent back, and they turn it into a non-bowl season. So you can't, as a program, just whiff when you have the Will McDonalds of the world and the Brock Purdy's and all those guys and be like, oh, no, it's just that's y'all's expectation, not ours. They got at some point have to win games with these guys. And, I don't know how stocked the cupboard is next year at this point with what they've lost the last 2 years. So I don't know if they missed a window. I don't know if that window was ever really open for them, but I do know that window's broken and is in desperate need of repair right now. And so they had to do something, and it had to be on offense. And so this makes sense.
All right. So then, we mentioned Iowa State.
And you got to answer some questions about Hunter Dekkers, too, like just as far as turnovers, and that's something where you let him grow maybe, but you also need to, you let him grow, but you also, I think, need to look around and say, like, okay, are we sure this is the dude, and go there.
Well, now they'll do that, just like Baylor has to discuss what they're going to do, like many teams. Notre Dame, for example, we'll get into that in a minute, but let's talk about Iowa, because this was a big deal. They have now a new quarterback, or at least they think they have a new quarterback. And, Paul, your thoughts about I just lost his name.
Cade McNamara.
Cade McNamara, late yesterday evening, deciding he's going to transfer from Notre Dame to Iowa.
I think
from
that
Michigan.
God, I'm screwing this whole thing up.
Well, there's so many, Smokey. It's easy. But, Cade McNamara, got Michigan to their first Big Ten title in a very long time last year. J.J. McCarthy is just a much better player athletically. Or a much more athletically gifted player. Better, I don't know, remains to be seen, but they didn't miss a beat once Cade McNamara went out and J.J. McCarthy came in this year. And I think that when you look at it, J.J. McCarthy's the future there. Cade had to transfer. He's got a couple years of eligibility. Iowa's probably a nice fit for him, given that he's not a guy who's going to whip it all over the yard. He's not going to be, in a spread offense, lighten it up. But in an offense like Michigan ran, which is a run-first power offense, that's probably what they're going to run under whoever the offensive coordinator will be at Iowa next year. I think it's a good thing. He's a leader. They're losing Spencer Petras. They lost another quarterback to the transfer portal. They lost a big-time wide receiver to the transfer portal, or at least their big-time wide receiver. So Cade McNamara really stabilizes them going forward.
Can we do a favor and not have Max, two different quarterbacks with the same start of the last name, and McNamara and what J.J. McCarthy does at Michigan? And so, again, Iowa, Craig, they need some oomph. And maybe they'll do something else as well. I don't think it's going to be with the offensive coordinator, because that's, of course, we know Kurt Ferentz's son. But your thoughts about this move?
I think it's something that needed to happen to at least inspire some hope for Iowa fans that the changes were coming. And certainly, if you look at that offense, Brian Ferentz took a bulk of the hatred or the angst and the just the annoyance of that fan base all year long seemingly was directed in one direction, but I don't think that they were exactly like just star-studded at quarterback either. I do think that you could upgrade there, and I think that they probably have. Padilla, you mentioned their backup also joining Petras as far as the transfer portal goes, and I think this is a good move for both sides. Obviously, he was not going to be the starter at Michigan any longer. They've got their guy now. He had already been in that competition, lost that competition. He'd had his time at the helm over the last couple of years, and, it ultimately shook out to where he was going to be riding the bench, barring an injury. So he had to do something. You look at who's most desperate, who's more desperate than Iowa Hawkeyes football for a real deal quarterback. I mean, I can't imagine anybody is more desperate than they are for a little oomph on offense. So, yeah, this shakes the trees a little bit, gives a little bit of energy to an area that has not had much of it, and it's not going to cure necessarily what Brian Ferentz did or did not do that, people were or were not pleased with. But it does give them, I think, an upgrade, and it does give them a little bit of juice on offense. And now you've got several months to add on to that and shape that, and I think it gives you a little bit of excitement for the first time in a while on that side of the ball.
All right, Boston College